Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. California Governor Gavin Newsom announcing just in the last couple of hours that almost all schools in the state will not be allowed to reopen in person for the foreseeable future. This as cases and deaths continue to rise here and across the country. U.S. stocks rising, but volume low. Investors continuing to be cautious on the back of corporate earnings, various pieces of economic data, and COVID-19 news, of course. Volatility will be the name of the game for the foreseeable future, and perhaps also low volume. I want to bring in our Abigail Doolittle, who's been following all the action, or lack thereof, I suppose I should say. Abigail, walk us through the theme of today.
Well, lack of action was definitely the theme on this slow summer Friday trading day. You know, early in the day, Emily, there was some fluctuating between small gains and losses for the S&P 500 and the Dow and the NASDAQ. But this is the first time in quite a few days, because we've been talking about volatility, and you were just saying volatility is the name of the game. And that has been true for the most part. But this was the first day in quite some time where it didn't feel like there was a shoe that might drop potentially, or where we did see some true bumpiness. That being said, there's reason to think that could be ahead. But today, the S&P 500 up just a little bit. The NASDAQ 100 managing to pull out a gain, too. At one point, it seemed like the NASDAQ might put up its first two-day decline, which would have been the first time, I believe, in 2 months. But again, pulling up a gain, part of that having to do with biotech, Goldman having constructive comments on Moderna. The FANG index, though, that was where some weakness was, down 0.4% on the week, the worst week going back to March. That's true, too, for the NASDAQ. We have the NASDAQ down on the week, the S&P 500, the first time we've seen that since the fall of 2018. That might not be the most auspicious signal. And speaking of weekly performance, Netflix on the week down more than 10%, its worst week in a year since they had a bad quarter last June as well, reported in July. So, you know, this, of course, comes on that not great second quarter, but the third quarter guide really weighing. That stock, Emily, had been priced to perfection. Investors didn't get it. It produced, again, the worst week in a year.
Right. And despite that, you had some upgrades on Wall Street. We're going to get to that in a moment, but sort of continuing the theme, it seems, of investors rotating out of tech, which I know that you've been talking about. Talk to us about other tech names this week. Tesla, which we know has been on a roll, Microsoft as well.
Well, so here's the big thing out of that Netflix earnings report that we have learned, Emily, because sometimes you'll have a company, they put up a poor quarter, and the after hours, the stock is down. The next day, it recovers. That did not happen. It tells you that investors have priced these stocks to perfection, with this New York FANG index up 70% since mid-March. It's unbelievable. That really speaks to that expectation for very good, very solid, very clean quarters. Netflix didn't do that. So if some of these other mega cap companies don't do that as well, it could be a real issue. Tesla, it is unbelievable how much this stock is up on the year. Out of the March low, even more. But on the year, Tesla's up 250%. They, of course, already pre-announced their deliveries for the second quarter, which somehow came in stronger than expected. But it will have to be a very clean quarter. Options, Emily, suggesting that Tesla is going to move up or down by 13%. So it's either going to be a blowout to the upside, or there's going to be a real disappointment. Microsoft, it's their fourth quarter, of course, and we'll be talking about both of these companies in more detail next week, I imagine. Their fourth quarter, that's typically a strong fiscal quarter for them. Let's see whether or not they can deliver, because Netflix right now setting the expectation that there could be some choppy, volatile action ahead for some of these mega caps and big techs, unless they put up really great quarters and guides.
All right, Abigail, thanks so much. We'll be watching Netflix closely. And I do want to talk a little bit more right now about just how Wall Street received that report. As Abigail mentioned, a strong second quarter, but the forecast for the current quarter was light. Of course, Netflix has been a favorite with everybody sheltering from home, working from home, sheltering in place. Some analysts raising their price targets despite the light forecast. I want to get to that with Bloomberg's Cameron Leach, who's been following this. Talk to us, Cameron, about Wall Street's reaction to the news yesterday.
Hi, Emily. I'll play it straight here. Netflix found itself in a tough situation. Let's call it a positive conundrum, if you will. A global crisis in COVID-19 hit the U.S. hard, and tech and media investors needed somewhere to store their cash and investments. Now, Netflix barely has any physical assets, which basically would have been losing revenue at the moment due to the pandemic closures, causing mandated closures, of course. But this special company has the ability to access all of its customers worldwide. So short answer, yes, Wall Street had been too bullish, and I think management recognized that. And so that's probably why we see a third quarter subscriber forecast as being that's somewhat low, just trying to get the Wall Street analysts and investors to somewhat cool off a bit.
Meantime, the company also promoted Ted Sarandos, the chief content officer, who's been the architect of their original content strategy, to co-CEO. How did investors digest that news today? I know that they've been, basically running the company together for a long time, but this was still something that we did not expect.
I think we're seeing a changing of the guards across the media sector in general. We saw Disney do some changing of the guards with their CEOs just recently, and I think for some investors, it kind of spooked them, and especially because I think some investors in the company wasn't sure what the plan was for Reed Hastings going forward. But if you look at the earnings call from yesterday, you got a promise from Reed Hastings basically saying that he'd be around for another decade. And, RBC Capital says that's just an added bonus to hear. Ted has kind of been running the content for the company and seems to have been doing a great job, because I've been watching Too Hot to Handle and Selling Sunset. I'm still watching now. So I think they'll be all right.
We're going to have to swap our Netflix lists after the show, Cameron. You did have some, despite the light forecast, you did have some analyst upgrades. JP Morgan upgrading Netflix to a street high. What is the bull case, given that, we are continuing to see this outbreak play out across the country and around the world? Obviously, Netflix has new frontiers for growth internationally. California just said that, all of our kids are going back to school, but only remotely. So does that mean good things for Netflix?
Yeah, I would agree. I think just us seeing a spike in these coronavirus cases, people being at home, they need entertainment. That's going to be one service that they really go to see, and that's going to be Netflix. I think Netflix pretty much has a good chance to, flex their pricing power, their pricing muscle. And I think that might be a catalyst for investors looking ahead for further growth. It looks like we might be in this pandemic and this social distancing measure for some time. So I think that remains to be at the foundation of why analysts and, some investors are still bullish. All
right. Cameron Leach, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy your Netflixing tonight. All right, coming up, a cybersecurity software company has found several risks and vulnerabilities within TikTok. We're going to talk to them about exactly what is so alarming and how that could impact users. Coming up, this is Bloomberg. "25 U.S. House lawmakers have written to Attorney General William Barr calling for a ban on the popular app TikTok. This amid rising concerns over the app's security and privacy threat to users. Joining us to discuss, Mark Ostrowski, head of engineering at the cybersecurity firm Check Point. The company has developed multiple security vulnerabilities in the TikTok app. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. So talk to us about exactly what you've discovered. You found that attackers could essentially break in and upload unauthorized videos, make private videos public. It sounds like kind of a nightmare.
Absolutely. Thanks, Emily. Yeah, so in January, Checkpoint Research was able to find a flaw and vulnerability relative to the SMS messaging, in which the way TikTok communicates with their users. And basically, what you could perform is an attack where sending SMS messages that were specifically crafted. You could modify videos, you could delete videos, you could upload videos, as well as extract personal information from that platform. And of course, Checkpoint disclosed this in a responsible disclosure, and TikTok was able to remedy the issue, and therefore, keeping their users safe. This is something that we discovered back in January.
So currently, how confident are you about the security of the platform, especially as you have lawmakers calling for the app to be banned. You've got it banned in India, President Trump mulling a ban, and companies like Wells Fargo taking it off employees' phones.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's been quite the week here in the world of cybersecurity, and a lot of things have been demonstrated relative to personal information and privacy, messagings and things like that. So specific to TikTok, they're obviously when organizations have or companies have issues like this, like we had talked about in January, they quickly ramp up and are able to make changes and to create environments that are more secure and applications that are more secure. So, the biggest issue that we see right now across all applications that are being used at a hyperscale, meaning that there's billions of users that are accessing specific applications. That as consumers and as users of the platform, we want to be assured that our information is being handled in a private manner. And that's really the concern, right? As we look at applications that again have this hyperscale and this large attack surface, are they able to have secure infrastructure? Are they able to properly handle our information? And that's obviously a big issue that's very much in the news as we sit here today.
So, do you have a position? I mean, do you think that TikTok is a national security risk? Do you think that U.S. citizens should be not using it?
I'll answer the question this way. I think all nation states and all organizations and schools and things like that need to play a stake in the security and how their information is being shared. So when we look at specifically like TikTok, and we can kind of expand this as well to Twitter, is that the goal, right, is for us to be able to have trust with the companies which we share our information. But at the same time, as consumers or employees, we also have to be able to understand where our information is and how that information could be used. If you kind of look forward in the last 24, 36 hours and look at Twitter, for example, if you can very much draw a parallel to what a lot of people are nervous about. If you think about what we know as we so far relative to Twitter, as we know social engineering was involved. It's potentially spear phishing could have been involved. And when those types of situations are trying to be exploited by threat actors, having personal information is one key piece of success criteria that you would need to be able to carry on these types of campaigns. So if you draw a parallel between applications that have hyperscale like TikTok and like Twitter, and then you draw the parallel to what we've seen in the last 24 hours relative to using sophisticated social engineering techniques. If you combine those two things together, that's what results in a position that Checkpoint wants to highlight, is that those are the types of things, if you draw them together, it really highlights the significance of controlling privacy and using safe and secure applications and taking cybersecurity very seriously.
Now, we are getting more information about this Twitter hack and how it was carried out, but there are still a lot of things we don't know. Twitter now saying about 130 accounts were compromised. These were very high-profile accounts, as we know. Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, etc. But the attackers got control of their accounts and were able to post messages from them and essentially lock them so that if you were the legitimate owner of those accounts, you couldn't even delete those tweets. What's your take on what happened here and just simply how egregious this was?
Yeah, it's a great question, Emily. So when you look at, how high-profile users leverage these social media platforms, there's a lot of things that should be done, even just as regular users like myself, right? You have multi-factor authentication turned on. You keep track of, any type of geo-awareness alerts that you can get and how people are potentially trying to access your account. And in this scenario, no matter how good and how much protection people put in place, this is a scenario where, obviously, even just looking at some of the information that Twitter publicly disclosed, right, tools were accessed where these types of attack could be coordinated. So when you really break this down, it goes back to some, obviously earlier what I talked about, where you have these platforms that have very, very wide attack surfaces, and those are the targets. Attackers and threat actors want to look for areas in which there's the largest surface and the biggest return on any activity that they're trying to put out there. So, when you look at, this specific attack and the fact that the users could really have no recourse into being able to stop this account takeover scenario, you really have to look back, actually at the platforms themselves and make sure that as we move forward and we move forward through the rest of the year, that any of these sort of windows or any sort of these tools that could have this hyper level of administrative access are reduced just to the folks that actually need that access. And by doing that, it obviously reduces the risks both, from a platform perspective, but also reduces the risk of personal information or this type of, attack to be able to be coordinated where information is being sent out as if they were somebody else. And by the way, we've seen this before in other examples outside of just Twitter, right? So we've seen examples, with, SIM card swapping. We've seen examples with other instant messaging platforms where crafted information and messages could be sent. So this is not necessarily anything new. I just think that the way that we see it playing out in the last 24, 36 hours, has been very interesting and really sheds a light on how important that companies that have this massive following are able to control how the platform is being secure.
In fact, Jack Dorsey himself was the victim of a SIM card swap hack, and now Twitter could be facing a huge fine from U.S. regulators for essentially not doing enough to protect user information. Okay, Mark Ostrowski, the Checkpoint head of engineering, thank you so much for your detailed analysis on what happened there. Okay, coming up, Georgia, the state divided on wearing masks, as are many states across the country, as coronavirus cases continue to mount. States' mayors defying the orders of Governor Brian Kemp. Bloomberg talks about it all with Georgia gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams. That conversation is next. With the pandemic severely disrupting the 2020 election run-up, there is significant concern about whether the U.S. can pull off a safe election in November. Stacey Abrams, former Georgia gubernatorial candidate, is one of the most prominent voices pushing for better mail-in voting procedures. She spoke exclusively with Bloomberg's Kevin Cirilli earlier today.
First, we have to guarantee that they have the right to vote by mail. We have 34 states that allow vote by mail with no excuses, meaning anyone can do it. But we have 16 states that put restrictions on it. And unfortunately, we have a president who's doing his level best to undermine the integrity of the process. He, in a very erratic way, said that he doesn't believe in mail-in balloting, but he believes in absentee ballots, which are the exact same thing. He has spread this lie about voter fraud being exacerbated by mail-in balloting, which is wholly untrue. The states that have used this have been able to demonstrate time and again this is not a problem. But we also have inaction by the U.S. Senate until they approve the HEROES Act, which will give $3.6 billion to cash-strapped states to allow them to expand vote by mail and scale it up to what we know is going to be necessary in the midst of COVID-19, as proven by primary usage. Then we will not be able to guarantee that people get that right to vote, let alone that those votes can be counted.
Leader Abrams, when I interview Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill, it feels like that act that you alluded to is going to be falling upon partisan lines. So what does the government need to do in spite of that in order to make sure that the ballots are counted? And what institutional, structural changes need to be made immediately, really, ahead of November 3rd?
Well, the structural requirements are three. One, we have to have expanded access to mail-in ballots. Number two, we have to have expanded access to early voting in the states that do not permit it. And number three, we have to have preservation of in-person voting on Election Day without a reduction in polling places. The HEROES Act will accomplish all three of those things by giving the states the resources they need. And the reality, this isn't a partisan issue. We have Republican secretaries of state like Michael Adams in Kentucky, who has said that vote by mail is the safest way to vote. We've got Democrats who've been calling out the same. And we know that states across this country are being forced to slash their budgets because of the COVID pandemic. And that the reason we have a United States of America, the reason we have a federal system, is that it's the responsibility of the federal government to step in moments of crisis like a pandemic and support the states in executing the constitutionally required November election. These are things that can be done, but we have to put aside partisanship to make sure it happens.
Should every American get a mail-in ballot in the mail without having to request one?
Every American who is eligible to vote should receive a ballot that is postage paid. That is absolutely the right thing to do. That would be the gold standard. But I live in reality. And so what I'm asking for is that we remove as many of the barriers as possible, that we put guardrails in place to ensure that everyone who wants to vote by mail can do so. However, we have to remember that not everyone can or should vote by mail. If you are disabled, if you have a language barrier, if you have if you are homeless, if you've been displaced by COVID, there are a number of communities that simply don't have the right or the capacity to vote by mail, and they need to be able to go in person. And that's why we can't simply focus on vote by mail. We have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, do vote by mail, in-person early voting, and election day voting without a closure of precincts.
Leader Abrams, as you have campaigned on this issue as well as for progressives across this country, you are often seen as a potential vice presidential pick for presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden. How has that conversation impacted your advocacy work, and what type of vice presidential pick do you hope the Biden team selects?
I've been doing this work since I was a college student. I've been working on voting rights because my parents raised me to understand that the power of a citizen begins with the power to vote. And that is why in the wake of the 2018 election, I founded Fair Fight. It's why I'm also focused on the 2020 census, which is just as important in setting the future of our right to vote because it determines our political districts. And that's why I created Fair Count. I have been working on this and I will continue to do this work because I'm driven by the mission of making sure that we have the policies that right our country and that make us all eligible for opportunity. And I look forward to watching Vice President Biden select the person he wants as his running mate. There's no one who knows better what he needs because he's done this job. And I believe that no matter who he picks, I'm going to be shoulder to shoulder with them, making certain that Vice President Biden becomes the president of the United States and that we start to right our democracy and restore America.
Stacey Abrams there, the founder of Fair Fight and Fair Fight Action. And just a quick disclaimer, Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, is a contributor to the Fair Fight Political Action Committee, which has been founded by, of course, Stacey Abrams to promote voter registration. All right, coming up, a new product that might make your Zoom calls easier and look a little bit like Saturday Night Live. Phil Libin of All Turtles will be with us next. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. The transformation of Netflix into a full-blown Hollywood studio is complete. The company has officially promoted former Chief Content Officer Ted Sarandos to be co-CEO alongside Netflix's co-founder and current CEO Reed Hastings. Meantime, shares are lower after the company delivered a disappointing subscriber forecast. I want to bring in e-marketer analyst Eric Hagstrom to discuss. Eric, Netflix added more subscribers, or almost as many subscribers, I should say, in the first half of the year that they did in all of last year. So it's been a great year so far, but investors not excited about the current quarter. What's your take on these numbers?
Well, this was expected. When we look at what happened with COVID so far, is it's really accelerated current trends. So more people are inside, but more people are also watching Netflix and watching streaming video. The total addressable market for Netflix hasn't changed. The people who are not subscribing to Netflix are, for the most part, older, less likely to have access to high-speed internet or be lower income. So none of that's really changed. But everyone right now in the U.S. and in many markets who could potentially be a Netflix subscriber already is. So that's good for Netflix and it's good for growth. But when you look at future growth, when you look at the back half of 2020 as well as early 2021, we should expect some lumpy growth moving forward.
Where are the lumps going to be? I mean, where do you see the growth coming from and the growth potentially slowing down?
Well, growth is still going to come from international markets, and that's, what the trend was pre-COVID. Looking at the U.S., which is their largest market, we're still seeing population growth. We're still seeing people adopt streaming video. So that's still going to happen. But again, just at a much slower rate than in the past. Now, looking specifically to, the opportunity for Netflix, pay TV is losing subscribers at a, historic rate right now. And there's a lot of consumer spend that's opening up.
So I'd also love to hear your take on this co-CEO announcement. Co-CEOs have sort of gone out of style. We've seen it happen at various companies, but it doesn't often last very long. Salesforce added a co-CEO. That only lasted a couple of years. What's your take on what this really means for Netflix?
Well, Netflix has been remarkably steady over the past decade in terms of their leadership. Reed Hastings and Ted Sarandos have really led the company for the most part. And when you look at all their competitors in the media industry, there are very few companies that have, that sort of track record. And when you look at many of the other streamers who they're directly competing against, they've had CEOs come and go. Now, Reed Hastings has said that he does plan to be on board with Netflix for over a decade, he said. And I would expect that to be the case. Now, this is really, I wouldn't put too much emphasis on the fact that they're two co-CEOs now, largely because they've worked together for so long. And from everything that they're saying, it's going to be a very similar arrangement to what, has been the case for the past 10 years.
What about the original content pipeline? I mean, that has been a huge part of Netflix's latest success. Of course, Sarandos has been a huge part of that as well. But, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Production has shut down. We don't know how long we're going to be in this for. Netflix, of course, has a huge library. We're all discovering things that we might not have otherwise. But how does the content pipeline actually look?
Well, it looks fantastic for Netflix, which is much better than really any of their competitors. According to Netflix, their content schedule won't really be impacted until later in 2021. And when you look at companies like Disney, HBO, even some of the traditional cable TV networks, they don't produce content that far in advance. Netflix has been remarkably forward-looking in terms of how much content they produce and how well in advance they produce. So really, I would not expect there to be significant changes to any sort of content release schedule until late in 2021. And by then, production may have been able to ramp up and they can push some shows out pretty quickly.
All right, Eric Hagstrom of eMarketer, always good to have you with us. Thank you so much for your insights there. All right, well, the Paycheck Protection Program has been a lifeline for small businesses across the country, including the AI startup All Turtles. Co-founder and CEO Phil Libin joined us to talk about how the loan has impacted the arc of the company, as well as a new video presentation project that could be useful as we all continue to work from home called
We got the PPP loan just in time, and it let us keep everyone employed and work through some, a difficult few months until we got some new projects, new products going, and we're actually doing pretty well and hiring again. So I think if it wasn't for the government, we'd be in bad shape. But now we're looking to expand.
Now, it's enabled you to help build your latest product, which is an interactive video presentation product, which will be useful for so many people working from home. Tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, this is the first thing that we started kind of post-quarantine. This is the first, native to the lockdown product idea that we had. It's just being on video all day, every day, constant Zoom meetings and Google Hangouts. It's just really tiring. And so we wanted something that would make it more effective, more interesting, less fatiguing. And so we came up with
Now, there are some products out there like Prezi. How does this stand out from some of the competitors? Show us some of the options.
Well, so I'm never really quite sure what other companies do. We're kind of too busy focusing on what we do. And I think there's a whole new category of products now, which is all going to be about how to perform over video. And we just want to be the best there is at it. What we can do is really simple. So it's easy kind of background like this, but I can show slides and presentations, and instead of having to show my screen, which is what you usually have to do when you're presenting on Zoom or something, which is kind of boring, we can just do this. We can just show over the face, and I need to get out of the way a little bit, so go pooh like that, and I can still be here and point at things, and if I want, I can make the slide full screen and fly around and point at things this way with my head. This is all a method of presenting, which is really fun, really engaging. I think better than you can do in real life, let alone over video.
Some of the largest school districts are now announcing distance learning only as we see the outbreak continue to surge in different places across the country. My school district is now saying this. You've got parents and teachers who are terrified about another year of this. Is this something that schools and teachers can use as well?
The way that we think about this is basically, I think we just need to embrace the fact that everything in the world going forward is going to be hybrid. It's going to be a hybrid between in-person and online. Nothing is ever going to be fully in person again. Even after the pandemic is over, there's always going to be some people in person, some people online, and it's going to be hybrid between live and pre-recorded. And we should start making tools that make the hybrid experience better than the real life experience used to be. I think in the first generation of these things, everyone tries to say, well, how can we make the online experience almost as good as we had back in the old days? But that's kind of doomed to failure. You can't make it almost as good. You have to leap over that. You have to invent new things to make it better. And yeah, online education or hybrid education with some people present in person and some people online is very much a use case for us. But so is speaking and performing and doing sales presentations. All the things that we now have to do for the rest of the world in a way that's always going to be a mixture of online and off.
We've been talking about the shift away from office centricity. You've got the CEOs of Twitter, Slack, Shopify telling their employees they can work from home forever if they want. I mean, will it really be forever? As a CEO yourself, what is the balance of the hybrid?
Yeah, I think it's really going to come down to different industries, different companies. For us in kind of the knowledge workspace, we've found it to be pretty productive working remotely. And I was a skeptic myself. We always had multiple offices, different cities, different countries, but within each office, people were together. And I always thought, man, if I'm working from home, I'm not really working because I made so many of my decisions in, impromptu coffee meetings and walking around and that kind of stuff. And so I've definitely had to change the way that I work and communicate a lot more and a lot more intentionally. But it's been really productive. So I think for we're fortunate. We're mostly doing knowledge work, design and engineering. And so for us, yeah, we're probably going to stay hybrid forever. There's really no point in all cramming, commuting for an hour a day so that we could sit in a shared office. That just doesn't really make any sense. We'll probably find other opportunities to get together, doing offsites and things like that, when that becomes a good idea again. But of course, not everyone can do that, right? For other industries, there's going to be no choice but to gather in person when possible.
So you've got a delayed release. When will everyone be able to use this? When will you be able to use it on mobile, on Windows?
So right now we are in closed beta. So you can go to that app and sign up if you want, but it is Mac only. And we're inviting people pretty slowly. We're not looking for hype right now. What we're really looking for is to find people that we can help, find people whose lives or careers or jobs can be enhanced with get into their hands and then work with them pretty closely for the next month or so to just make it a better product. So we're serious about it as a beta product. And initially it's Mac only, but by the time we're ready to have a full release, which will be in the fall, I think September, October, by then we'll have a Windows version and we'll have versions for other platforms as well. And then everyone will be able to use it. But right now we're really looking for people to help us make the product in beta.
Now the name, you're setting yourself up for a lot of bad jokes there. Why?
The product is for performing. Nike used to have the slogan, everyone's an athlete. And I was always like, I'm not. But the way we think about it is everyone's a performer, right? All of us right now have these micro performances many times a day. Is for that performance. Whenever you want to perform a little bit, it elevates your performance on video quite a bit. Everyone can say thoughtlessly without thinking about it, just in conversation. But if you try to say it intentionally, it's actually kind of hard. Like even for me, to say it intentionally, to say, oh, so we built, I have to pause for half a second because I have to consider how am I going to pronounce it? Which syllable am I going to inflect? It's almost like you can't say the name, you have to perform it. The name itself is a micro performance.
We'll be following that. We do have some breaking news, though, to tell you about now. The website Down Detector, which monitors outages across the web, is reporting that users are saying Amazon Web Services is having problems. Some other platforms, Google, Shopify, Cloudflare, also having problems. This happening just over the last few minutes. We don't know for sure if all of these are related, but it is certainly a significant number of companies having outages at the same time. That is something we're going to continue to follow as these headlines continue to roll in. Meantime, coming up, Uber is joining the likes of Apple, Google, Facebook, unveiling a new initiative to increase diversity at the company. Silicon Valley has making lots of such pledges over the years with little progress. Will this time be different? We'll discuss. This is Bloomberg. Uber is pledging to double Black leadership by 2025, becoming the latest company in Silicon Valley to echo national calls for racial and economic justice with measurable goals. In 2019, Uber increased Black representation to 9.3% of its workforce, but only 3.3% of its leadership. For more, I want to get to Lizette Chapman, who covers venture capital and startups and Uber for Bloomberg Technology. Lizette, Uber does have one of the most senior Black executives in the country. That is Tony West, who runs all of their legal operations. What exactly is Uber promising to do here?
Well, Uber's promising to do a whole bunch of changes and also updating people on the progress they've made on some, a year, 2, 3 years back. In this announcement that Dara made this morning, and we covered, he talks about how, that the Black Lives Matter movement and that has spurred a lot of these conversations cannot go on the back burner, that now is the time to act, and it needs to be something he keeps checking in with. So, top line, big changes that he's talking about: double the Black leadership in charge of the company, double the talent pipeline for people coming in and seeking a corporate path, people that might be drivers or working in other functions, as well as anti-bias training for riders and also for drivers, and more training and more education within the company. And they will continue to tie executive reviews and compensation to diversity goals. So those are just a few of them. And the biggest thing that he leaves everyone with is that hold Uber accountable. And like you mentioned earlier, there have been a lot of big promises, but it's kind of like, where is the proof? And so that's what he's inviting everyone to hold Uber accountable to going forward.
On that note, yesterday I spoke with Maxine Williams, the Chief Diversity Officer at Facebook, who is now at the leadership table with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. And you look at their diversity report, they've made a lot of progress on women, but, not much progress on Black employees, especially when it comes to Black engineers. I asked her, is that a failure of leadership of Zuckerberg and Sandberg, who say they care about these things, but that yet we are not seeing those numbers move? Take a listen to what Maxine Williams had to say.
I've worked in a lot of places. I've worked in different industries, and I have never worked in a place where I've had this much leadership driving this. Leadership saying, we need to do even more. We need to do it faster. We need to do it better. Leadership saying, what are the resources that we need to do this? We will apply those.
So she's saying there that she's never worked at a company where the leaders were more supportive of this. So if not for leadership, how are these companies, how is Uber going to get this done?
There is going to be, there are a lot of movements, and there's a lot of different initiatives taking place across tech, across venture capital, to make this industry look more like America and more like the communities that it serves. So, there are a lot of different initiatives going forward with this. What Dara keeps writing about and going back to is that this is not a one-time thing. This change is the change is overdue. There are some systemic issues that they're looking to change, like creating new pipelines for talent to come in and being more aggressive and looking out, for that. So, he's talking about that, and he's talking about, the diversity and inclusion report that they just began publishing a couple years ago. It was due out in May, but of course, COVID upended a lot of plans, and Uber had to slice its workforce by 25%. So, the original numbers that they had to update everyone on where they are with diversity as a whole as a company had to be scrapped. They're redoing, and they're looking at that now. And we should expect that later this year. I think I was told in a couple more months. So, what can they do? Continue plugging forward by the looks of the actions that they've been taking.
Right. And of course, Uber is a company whose customers and drivers certainly look a lot more like America than probably people in the corporate headquarters. Lizette Chapman, who covers Uber for us, thank you so much for bringing us that report. Okay, still ahead, looking to get food delivered to a picnic spot somewhere in the middle of a park as you try to get some fresh air? Well, now there's a service for that. We're going to talk to the founder of Picnic Post next. This is Bloomberg. With summer in full swing and social distancing still in full effect, folks in New York City have taken to picnicking in the park to get some fresh air. To meet the demand for meals in the park, Sam Collins, a 26-year-old from New York City, started Picnic Post, a food delivery service that takes the food to picnickers, something that Uber Eats and Grubhub, believe it or not, are not doing. I caught up with Collins earlier today.
After my intensive quarantine, I got back to the city in mid-May, and I was just so excited to see that even though conditions were strange and we were still in the pandemic, everyone was finding a way to exist and to interact with each other safely, but resourcefully. And I remember being with a friend in Inlet Park and just looking around and seeing everyone outside in the park, eating, maintaining safety precautions, but also sort of connecting. We were excited by the idea, and I thought of ordering some food, and then I realized that I couldn't do it.
So is it just you on your bike with a cooler in the back?
Pretty much, yeah. Just me on my bike with a sort of a cooler backpack, and now I'm getting a couple other people involved.
So how exactly does it work?
So people order through another app, and then they go to our website, picnic-post.com, and you just click request delivery, and there's a little button with a form, and you just give us the basic information about your order, and I'll stop by, pick it up, I'll find them in the park and drop off their food.
So is this kind of a missing opportunity, or an opportunity that is missing at Uber with Uber Eats and DoorDash and Postmates, which just got acquired by Uber?
I know that some of them do deliver to the Great Lawn. There doesn't seem to be any functionality, as far as I know, for just finding you no matter where you are. And I think that is a missing opportunity.
So are you going to try to raise money from venture capital or build this into something bigger?
Well, first, I just want to bootstrap more, spread in New York City, and productize, I think, to build an app that could actually handle orders so I don't have to deal with any third parties. Those are the things that I'm thinking about most right now.
How much money are you making off this?
It's definitely modest right now, no doubt about that. On a big day, we can have like $70 to $80, especially if there's a bigger order or there's a kind of a more large scale picnic.
And why are you doing this? I don't know what you were doing before. But obviously we know people lost jobs, schools are closed.
I want experience starting a business and actually talking to customers from day one and sort of really bootstrapping it. I don't want to be sitting behind a desk sort of coding an app right now, especially now that it's so exciting to have human connection and be able to be building something and helping people adapt to this new world and sort of find a silver lining and a way to sort of exist and really enjoy life now.
So what were you doing before this?
I was building a travel app, and I was just on my way to go to promote my travel app in hostels in Europe right when all this struck. So I had to change course for sure.
And how do you see the customer relationship evolving?
We're focusing on having more returning customers and sort of establishing the park as a consistent dining spot and sort of establishing ourselves as the waiters and waitresses of the park.
So it's Central Park only right now. No plans to like expand to other boroughs.
We are expanding, actually. We recently expanded to the piers above 42nd Street. Those are really nice places to eat. Beautiful view of Hudson River and Riverside Park.
All right, power to him. I've enjoyed a few picnics while sheltering in place. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. We'll see you back here Monday.